lovely and astute and insightful introduction that I feel I have never really been introduced by anyone ever before until now. The first poem that I'm going to read is from a series of poems that I'm writing called Broken Rules. And they were inspired by Donald Barthelme in UCLA. And he stood on stage and he said to the audience, you know, there's one rule I always tell my students: never begin a story with a description of the weather. And I thought, well, that's wonderful, because now I can begin a poem with a description of the weather. And then I went around collecting other rules from other poets, saying, what do you always tell your students to never do? Then the challenge is, of course, to understand the wisdom of the rule, understand why the rule exists, so that you can challenge yourself to avoid the pitfalls that the rule warns against. So, first, the weather. My house is of brick, but something is blowing it down. The tenement doors burst in and windows slam against the walls of the unrented rooms. A garbage lid is picked up and flung with a shock I half love, and in East downtown, those who are hungry are cold. Alas, Bartholomew, there is weather in LA. It's implacable, it's bad news for literature. But suddenly, I'm crazy for any news. The air is full of ions and hard rain, with an urge to be let in. And me, I want to go off the deep end, to begin story after story with the same failed metaphor of our lives till I make it right. Now, I'm going to begin a series of a few humorous poems that in Los Angeles are now called stand-up poems. But it doesn't really mean comic poems. It really refers to a sort of literate performance poetry. At least, well, we flatter ourselves that it's literate anyway. This poem I wrote to cure my writer's block. And I couldn't write for a long period of time. And then finally I started asking myself a series of questions. I said, okay, why can't you write? And the answer was, well, because there's not enough strong emotion in my life right now. And then I said, okay, well, what do you feel the most emotionally about? And the answer was the fact that I can't write. So then I went, okay, write about that. So this cured my writer's block. And it's called writer's block. You dream a man you've never heard of named Henry Schwinn walks up and tells you you have no talent. You wake up with chills and a hernia in your imagination knowing he's right. At 3 a.m. in the winter, on a Monday and a night of no moon, who needs this news? It drives you from bed through the reaches of cold air to your kitchen and makes you tear everything out of the cupboard. You've got to have gin. You've got to have vodka. You've got to have creme de banana. This is your chance to become the tragic drunk you've secretly wanted to be. At last, among the pots, chipped ceramics, scattered barley, and chiclets from your trip to New York, you find a half jar of Kahlua marked Merry Christmas, Love Bob, December 31st, 81. What's left from that passion is sticky as tar and won't pour. So you dig down and spoon it, trying to reach China, but reach only the floor, unbudgeable and familiar as your own face. And when the floor gives way and you are cradled and rocked in a body of unnamed water, you are still not back in the womb, nor dead, still not safe, still not through. You are still on this planet, not a better one, and are still unable to trade in your own future for some popular blondes as all of you proceeds forward but your birth date. And you still cannot write. And the vegetables that were once the raw matter of poems are just the raw matter of soup. And even the broom is no metaphor. and the percolator will not speak its true name, and the orange will not open onto daylight, and the hen's eggs are silent, and the pomegranate is mute as all fruit, and when at last the walls start to speak, they sound just like Henry Schwinn. And this is a famous poem in my region. At least in my neighborhood, it's famous. It's as famous as any other poem in East Hollywood right now. And I get a lot of requests for it. Also from men, because even if it's called breasts and it's about breasts, but men relate it to their own things. Breasts. In my teens, they were famous for their insignificance. Though I exercised and hoped beyond hope, they remained just figments of imagination or suggestions of all that is possible, the wealth that has only half come into this world. But now, in their own succinct way, they can hold their own with those of men's fantasies, though they don't drop toward my waist like diving bells, or precede me when I enter a room. Though they aren't gratuitous like those featured in Penthouse, they are more elemental, being closer to the heart. They are endowed with magical properties, unsounded mysteries, like two incipient moons flattened by darkness. They vanish when I lie on my back. They are prized by diamond cutters, vegetarians, and collectors of miniatures, but are shunned by plebeians, by readers of pulp novels, and are overlooked by the nearsighted. Yet a man must not seize them like mouthfuls of fast food packaged by low-paid workers. No, he must approach them like a man who was once blind for years but can now see, like a man who was alone a long time, kidnapped by propagandists, locked up in a room but is now free, like a man who has fallen from his sad and silent past into my arms, and now everything shines with an almost unbearable splendor. As for other poets who've written of their own, my breasts are indisputably closer to poetry, precise yet subtle, the most economical of forms. In short, my breasts are superior to all breast poems, and to even, I'm abashed to admit, my own poems. In this respect, I'm in competition with myself and must strive my whole life to equal in writing their exquisitely finite triumph. This was inspired by a really awe-inspiring quote from a book that attempted to explain the theory of relativity to me, and I understand it a little bit now, but not completely. But anyway, in the relativity explosion, there was this quote: "One could always say that instead of the hand grasping the apple, the hand thrusts the entire universe backwards, propelling the apple against the hand." So I like to think of it that way. I always think of it that way now. This is the poem that emerged from that. "And here you thought you were ineffectual. At 2 a.m., the pipes of your sink explode, drowning the air. You rush in. It's as if water is walking on water, and every knob you turn lets go of another geyser. Then you know water has rebelled against you. It will never again lie down still and serviceable. And when you wear something new and quite expensive, a man attacks you with a glass of wine, then apologizes like mad. He'll turn out to be some worthless stranger with whom you'll have an affair. Then historians will record that on March 3rd, p.m., 1979, across the world, all unfaithful husbands left home for their new loves, except your man who went back to his wife." And when you die, you'll be boxed and shipped to the wrong funeral, to a gathering where you're recognized and widely disliked. And yet, on this dusty, unkempt planet, on which felons have urinated, on which drunks have vomited for countless years, there is still one last unimpeachable glory. See that ungrasped apple on the kitchen counter? Let your hand reach. The earth slides backwards, carrying a myriad of other planets, and the sparkling darkness between them in tiny lenses of stars and great unwieldy suns. Stand still and give thanks. All of space, your life, all that life is, has brought you this gift. It is fruit, crowning your palm like manna from some better world. Now I'm going to read some of my earlier work. It's sort of pre-stand-up work. And I'm just going to read this because I kind of like the poem a lot, and I never read it. It doesn't seem to have too much to do with my life, but that's sort of a vanity, maybe. We think poems have something to do with our life. Maybe they don't. This was from a book by Newt Hampson called Pan, and there was a scene in it where a hunter met in the forest with a woman, and something happened between them, and I was sort of entranced by that. So I wrote this shortly after I left Fresno, 16 years ago. Henriette and the Hunter. It was the last day of summer, a hot day, and only the trees trembling and no wind were thinking of winter. I was gathering kindling when I heard one shot and saw a bird fall like a single dark drop from the sky. It was so sad. I wanted to throw myself into the sun, but instead I walked half dreaming to the place where the bird fell and found, as I knew I would, a man in the green jacket and yellow boots of a hunter. I knew he spent his winters alone, knew that with the wind shaking his door, he would make a fire and sit down to watch the flames fly around the iron pot. He told me that he killed only what he needed to live. Then he drew me toward him as if it were he who was dreaming all this, not I. As the sun dropped, the air began to whisper. It was the whirring of mayflies, the almost inaudible panic of moths. We lay down knowing one of us was just game, just one more wounded. We didn't care who. It's a very emotional poem, but it has nothing to do with my life, of course, not even in any allegorical way. I'll read another poem sort of from that same period, with a strange, something sort of strange and mysterious and fatalistic in it. And thank God I outgrew that period, this is called Things I Plan to Say. I've never seen a cyclone, I'll say. My life isn't complete. Then I'll see one in my mind's eye as I sit combing my hair. The comb will be mother of pearl. My hair will be the color of torchlight. I'd like to encounter one, I'll say, while wearing a chinchilla fur, and to die like that, exotically and rather terribly. I'll laugh, as if recalling something ironic about the rising of last night's moon. Suddenly, I'll be bored with danger. I'll want only to lie down on a Persian rug that is rumored to have once flown and sample macaroons from all over the world. No, I prefer the cyclone, its intensity, its self-containment. that appeals to me. Or instead I'll want to be lost in a blizzard wearing only gold bracelets from Mesopotamia. Or instead to be caressed by an heiress who harbors a shocking secret. I'll stretch luxuriously like a cat whose pedigree can't be deciphered. I'll say, it's difficult to choose life over death when both have certain attractions. And then this is a very early stand-up poem. And it came about when, after I left here, I took a little class from Mark Strand, and he gave us an assignment to write a poem using these words, corduroy wolves in Bulgaria. And at first I thought, oh, that's a baby exercise. I reject that. But then this whole story started coming into my head. It was so clear to me. There was this married couple driving through the desert and having these adventures. And so I wrote that story. It's called Poem Using the Words Corduroy Wolves in Bulgaria. The headlights fizzed and went out. As if comprehending a signal, the car jerked to a stop. We sat thunderstruck, staring at a sky littered with stars and a couple planets, one red, one blue. It was then I invented my famous epithets, the right words for this night, this quality of darkness. Bulgaria, I murmured. Constantinople. You didn't agree. You felt the matter was grave and not conducive to whimsy. There was no gas station in sight, and everything under the hood had suddenly broken: the alternator, the carburetor, the radiator cap. You got out and began banging around with a wrench. So, this was the desert, flat as asphalt, with the wind rolling across, the cacti standing like poor unfortunates being held up by robbers. There might be wolves, I said, which frightened you horribly. Years later, in the court of divorce, this would be your major charge. I'd forced you to live for years in a constant state of alarm. And tonight already the whole marriage was falling apart. We discussed wolves and whether they lived in the desert, both of us shouting, "Cad," I said, "if this were the Arctic, you'd wear on my corduroy jacket if I had one, leaving me indigo blue in the cold." This last remark made you shout louder. You broke the clutch. Somehow the stick shift came off in my hand. "Emasculator," you sobbed, resorting to basic Freud. "Bulgaria," I wept. "Constantinople." These were insults this time, and you knew it. Whatever your failings, Harry, you knew me well. And this is another famous poem from East Hollywood. I have a lot of poems that deal with urban crisis, as Peter mentioned. And this is based on a true story, and I didn't have to invent as much as I wish were invented. It's called Letter to My Assailant. On such occasions, one comes to know someone spectacularly fast. Even with your unfriendly arm at my throat, you could hide nothing from me. Your failures with women, for instance, filed through my mind, failures moral and physical. And I knew your father was hostile to doors. He liked to slam them or break them down. Your mother worked her whole life without hoping for anything. She grew thin. Even in her grave, she kept shrinking. Now she's thin as a needle, one nearly invisible hand folded over the other. I even knew without looking your socks had red diamonds balanced one on the other. In fact, with my breath stopped short in my throat, your whole life flashed past my eyes, but I didn't let on. "I can't breathe," I gasped, and you loosened your hold. I suppose I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt impatient with men, with their small favors. Perhaps you felt the same about me. You'd no sooner reached through my torn blouse when my scream made you bolt. We leapt from each other like two hares released from a trap. Uh-oh, something's not right between men and women. Perhaps we talked too much. Or did we leave too much unsaid? For instance, when you ripped my shirt mumbling, "I don't want to hurt you," I replied, "That's what they all say." I'll admit I was glib, if you'll admit you were insensitive. Look, the world is brimming with happy couples, benign marriages, with men and women who've adjusted to each other's defects. Couldn't we adjust to each other's defects? I'll begin by trying harder not to forget you, to remember more clearly your approximate height and your brown shirt, which I described to the police. Our encounter must stand out in our minds, irrefutable, distinct from all others. I never intended for all this to become blurred in my memory, to confuse you with other men. I have 3 poems left to do, so we can start the countdown. Let's see if I can find, I'm only going to have 2 left to do if I can't find my rhyming poem. Well, all right. This is, I'm writing these poems now that have irregular rhyme. I invented my own rhyme scheme, the Lummisian rhyme scheme, famous for its irregularity. And it also has a little, and this is called Hot Pursuit, February 9th, 1992, with occasional rhyme and some assonance. It's a long title. And it's a very recent poem, as you can see, February 9th. It was not just the outcry of brakes, the grisly sound of metals scouring each other, then silence. No, it was a so delirious and slow plowing through and driving headlong into and past traffic lights, street lamp, indissoluble steels, plate glass, then the disruption of parked truck. Who could hear this crash like the fall of Rome or blue sky from her high window and not go out to see if someone's left alive? Under the late street lights, bits of windshield shine. They've been thrown so far it's like walking a road to Oz, not the yellow brick road, but another. The traffic lights lying knocked flat, and the walk don't walk box is so dark I think of a prize fighter down for the count. One police car has stopped behind the spot, the other's in pursuit. The kid hit the deck and took off. Everyone has drained out of the donut shop, the Armenian dance hall, Rollo's drugs, Mexicans in t-shirts in the balmy air. We stare at the parked truck that got socked from the back, then at the criminal car. Under the flung hood, the motor smokes and steams. Look at that bumper, we say, that twisted wheel. Clearly, the hull of this thing has been pushed too fast and far, especially the astonishingly caved-in passenger door. And the glove compartment's sprung, so the particulars of legal ownership drift out the driver's side. The driver's doors swung wide. It's just so ajar. It's like John Chamberlain's sculptures from crushed cars. Here is the art of disaster, the art of the split-second fatal bad choice. I know how our mistakes change the shape of things, but to look at the deep dents the kid put in that Ford coupe, you'd think what he wanted really was to make a crazy staircase and climb up. Meanwhile, none of us up late on this winter night, balmy as June can go. The motorist jumped out and split. We watched the street. He hauled ass down. We ask and ask, is he caught yet? But no, not even when aircraft aimed their spots at angry corners where a man could hide. With this notion of a running man needling us from the inside, this heap boiling like big game brought down in one shot. Who could sleep? But when we do, we dream up a metaphor for life, one long, long skid or flight down unlit streets. Next day, the wreck's cleaned up, the truck, the traffic light gone and nothing flat, just crumbs of windshield left underfoot. This is the art the city makes, throws out, then swallows back as if it were the sea. And this is where I live. And these are the streets you cross, every one the sight of someone's desperate run for cover. Remember that. It's okay. I'm going to end on a light poem, in parts anyway. This was another idea I got from Mark Strand. And most of what I learned about poetry, I learned from Peter and from Chuck and from Phil, all of the important things, I think, that I left here with. And Mark, when I studied from him, it's not that he taught me so much about poetry, but he kept saying all these things that would give me ideas for quirky poems. So I guess he did that well. And the last time I went to see him read, he said, he was telling the audience that he had once given a class the assignment, write a poem, a train, that begins with the line, "A train runs over me." And all of his students failed. I mean, that wasn't the class I was in. But anyway, that was I took that as a challenge. I thought, oh, I want to do that. Now, this is a very stand-up poem, and one thing I have to explain, I don't really have to explain it, but I will anyway. A lot of stand-up poems are they're both self-aggrandizing and self-mocking at the same time. Because if you're a poet in Los Angeles, you almost have to be both self-aggrandizing and self-mocking to live. And also there are many stand-up poems that are long, crazy narratives, as this one is. This is going to be my last poem, by the way. It's called "A Train Runs Over Me." That's right, a train runs over me. Or rather, knocks me effectively, deftly, into a violet patch where I lie like a sleeper. Oh, fabulous, the perfect pre-Raphaelite death that I dreamed of. Look how one arm has fallen so naturally, cradling my head, and one hand lies open as if conferring a benediction. I, Ophelia of the 810 Santa Fe freight, I, Lady of Shalott, came stepping down the pearly, chaste, and winding stairs of my chalet to love Lancelot. Then a train ran over me. Well, it knocked me to the side of the track. But look how beautiful I am among the wildflowers. Yes, wildflowers. Grumpy and Sneezy and 5 other men come up weeping. Alas, Snow White, oh, fabulous poet, now cracks an immortal heart. I sit up suddenly, I say, oh, I die, Horatio. The potent poison quite overcomes my spirit. And a dwarf says, puzzled, but my name's Sleepy, and it's not poison. You got run down by a train. I die again, and the 7 little men howl with grief. Oh, her poetry, oh, her acting, oh, and her articles for the downtown news. Was there ever such a talent? And who will love us? Who will sweep out our cottage by the glen? Who will take care of us now? Then they all scamper off to write my biography, which will make them rich. Next word of my passing reaches L.A. It's like Paris upon the death of Victor Hugo. The whole city mourns. Liquor stores, video rentals, electronic shops, even the franchises close. The signs say, gone to the processional. At my funeral, I make a short, elegant speech. I speak the last words of all the great writers. More light, I murmur at the end. Oh, what does that mean? Cries the entire population of L.A. Who knows? I say, ask Goethe. I die again, a stunned pause, then the ground shakes from the pounding ovation. Next, the killer is identified, not the true engineer, but an evil, talentless editor of a New York journal. For years, he had tried and tried to flatten me, and finally he hijacked that train. He is driven from town by a mob who scream after him, phony, scam artists, never wrote a truly original line in your life. Ha! Days pass, and now the several dwarves who'd become disillusioned reunite, excited. They rush to downtown. We've seen her. She is resurrected. What, again? Shrieks the population of L.A. But there are no further sightings. Several promoters must cancel their hopes for a post-mortem tour, because I am profoundly, consummately, passionately dead, because a train ran over me, an old-fashioned one with a smoking car. And this, Providence, is the death I require, not the stupid, ignominious one you have planned for me, the ridiculous mishap on the Hollywood freeway, or else me lying for days in a rundown apartment amidst stacks of newspapers, scavenged objects, cardboard egg trays till I'm found by its census taker. Fate, I reject you. Instead, it will be as I specify. I am walking beneath a yellow umbrella in this light rain. An engine rumbles and steams forth from the train sheds of Kansas City. By the time it reaches me, it's a runaway, a locomotive heaving out steam, the passengers begging for mercy. The engineer throws the weight of all he believes on the brakes and prays that whatever luck is owed him be delivered. The impact is like the collision of two worlds, the explosion of an entire life. And now I leap, astonished as a student dancer, toward that red and wild flower, if only I could think of its name.
All these years, and she still makes me feel a little repressed. I should announce to you that both poets this evening, Suzanne and Charles, have books available. They would be very happy to part with them, and you will have a chance to do so. Where's Jackie? Do you still want a brief intermission, Jackie?
We need to have it because the theater group will be coming out.
Okay, the theater group is coming out.
When they go back in, we'll come back in the theater.
Okay, evidently it has something to do with toilets, I don't know. Anyway, there will be a short intermission before Charles reads, and there will be books available if you would like to purchase them. Brief intermission. Charles Hanzlicek. For well over 20 years, Charles has been a central figure in this poetic community. A poet, as a teacher of poets. For the same number of years, he's been my colleague and friend. And I've been privileged to watch him steadily create a body of work that's remarkable for its integrity and its wholeness. In his first book, in the very first poem of his first book, he speaks of a man waiting in the bushes, is a flasher who opens his raincoat like wings. I do not believe that the poem is confessional, Charles. Or at least I hope it's not Charles. The man opens his raincoat like wings, and he says, to be is to expose oneself, head, pecker, and knees. And I think that this might well serve as a motto for Chuck's work and as a metaphor for his sense of the poet's role, that deliberate exposure of the self. I can hardly do much justice to his work in this brief introduction. So let me offer just two very brief passages from his own poems that might serve as a kind of touchstone or touchstones for qualities that I feel are in his work. In this first passage, the speaker, and the speaker here is, I think, very close to Charles himself, is frying an egg for his daughter. And he speaks about the changes that come over. And then he writes a very small passage, which is an inventory of celebration. The passage goes like this. The house with its morning light that fills me like a revelation. The yard with its trees that cast a bit more shade each summer. The love of a woman that both is and isn't confounding. What's discovered in this small inventory is a sense of wonder in the commonplace, and a poetry in the very unmetaphysical dailiness of our lives. It seems easy, but it's not. One needs to recover this from the almost unreadable signs of experience. And perhaps more important, one must believe that, to quote him again, in the end, beyond the metaphors, we can't help loving life. Such poetry is never a small matter, since it's always very close to where we ourselves live. The second passage concerns an old man, a neighbor. And he's a neighbor who has a particular action. 3 very brief lines. Listen. An old man who, shoeing the sparrows that shit with care on his waxed Oldsmobile. That's the voice. Unadorned, direct speech. Its precise music. Its peculiar American tang that sits on the tongue. Shooting the sparrows that shit with care on his waxed Oldsmobile. It's a fit speech for these poems. Subject and voice, passion and clarity, head, pecker, and knees. It's a lovely combination. Charles.
Thank you, Peter. I feel like I should quit while I'm ahead. But since we're all here, I wanted to start by reading a few poems about Czechoslovakia, country and people that I feel very close to. These first two are prose poems. The first one is about a composer named Leos Janáček. If you saw the movie of The Unbearable Lightness of Being, which I thought was an unbearably heavy movie, Janáček's string quartet, his first string quartet, was the leitmotif through that whole movie. On October 1st, 1905, the composer Leos Janáček was having a miserable day. He stood on Charles Bridge, looking at the bronze figure of a martyr who was not fully martyred yet, since he was still being tortured. In his briefcase, Janáček had a score that had just been rejected, no doubt not for the first time. He took out the score, showed it to the near martyr with a scowl, as if to suggest that a lesser pain is still pain, and torture, after all, is torture. And then he cast what was more than bread to him upon the waters of the Vltava. A wind flowing downriver scattered the pages. He later told a friend, rather pleasantly, that the sheets of his music had floated on the river like white swans. In Janáček's day, swans on the Vltava were not a common sight. Now they are everywhere on the river. On October 1st, 1905, Leos Janáček would never have dreamed that his reputation and the swan population of Prague would grow in perfect synchrony. This is understandable. No matter how beautiful swans might be, they are not very musical. And then this one comes more or less out of the newspapers from the events in late November of 1989, so it's no surprise the title is Prague, late November 1989. You remember that moment when they brought Dubček onto the balcony, who had been the head of the government in '68 when the Russians came in. And the wonderful humor of the Czechs comes out in this. After democratization, under communism, they had full employment, but there were all these weird jobs, like people made a living being the head of the Lenin Appreciation Committee in some little village, And this was a career. And then when democratization came along, all these people were out, so all of a sudden 30% of the people were unemployed. And one Czech wag was quoted in the papers as saying, the Czechs are afraid of only two things. One, that they'll lose their jobs, and two, that they'll have to work. 250,000 people are gathered on the square. After 700 lost battles for Czech freedom, they can feel in the air that the time may have come to win one. They light candles at the base of the statue of Wenceslas on horseback. Candles like ardor burn even in this cold. The tricolor, which must only be flown side by side with the Soviet flag, waves all across the square in sudden, solitary dignity. When Alexander Dubček appears on a balcony and throws out his arms in an embrace that enfolds an entire nation, a giddiness rises among them as if they are breathing laughing gas. They chant, Jákos to the garbage, Jákos to the garbage, and then Dubček to the castle, Dubček to the castle. The party twitches, but it is dead. Privilege is dead. The professor who has been stoking boilers on the night shift for 20 years may teach again. A man who closed down his newspaper in '68 is passing out free copies of today's revived edition. A voice over a loudspeaker calls for attention, and the crowd suddenly falls silent. There is an urgent message. A 9-year-old boy named Hansa has become separated from his mother. Be brave, Hansa, be brave, they chant. No Czech can be truly free until Hansa finds his mama. when we first started walking around Prague, we kept running into these wreaths, and they had a strange, dull kind of silver foil wrapped around them, and they were in the oddest places. And I knew even before I asked what they were, and they come up in it's explained in the poem what they are, Prague wreaths. You never have to walk far to find a silver foil wreath with its marker. Yet they always come as a shock, against a wall beside the gentle sweep of the Vltava, near an apartment entrance on a busy street. There must have been 100 witnesses. Over the buttons to a freight elevator in a department store, all about the city, men forced to find a way to be more than men were executed on the spot by Germans. I can hardly imagine myself in that place. Maybe I'm talking, maybe a book lies open on the table, maybe my hands move beneath an eiderdown to map a body, and in an instant the thought, the word, the caress, whatever the search is halted by a gunshot in the street. In front of a wreath at the gate to my favorite park, a blue titmouse couldn't care less which fool inspires my politics. It's morning, he woke hungry, so he flits from a maple to eat the crumbs of a breakfast roll from my open hand. 40 years ago, some hungry or distant relative of his saw the fall, the blood, right here, of Karl Spiro, 1897 to 1945, a creature who could not be tamed. Most of the wreaths didn't have names on them, but a few had these plaques, which I assume the family had put on them. And this particular one of Karl's was in a little park. And the family had put a white picket fence around it and planted geraniums there. The last time I read, I read the entire sequence of Mahler poems. There are 9 of them, and I'm just going to read 2 of them that where the Czech theme sort of weaves into them, the 7th and the 9th. The 7th has a epigraph from Elias Canetti. In these poems, if you didn't hear them before, I have a long chat with Mahler about various things. I've spent so much of my life listening to him that I thought it was his turn, so I bend his ear. Canetti says, a writer needs ancestors. He must know some of them by name. When he thinks he is going to choke on his own name, which he cannot get rid of, he harks back to ancestors who bear happy, deathless names of their own. They may smile at his importunity, but they do not rebuff him. They too need others, in their case, descendants. I mention Masaryk and Beneš in the poem. They were the first 2 presidents of Czechoslovakia between World War I and World War II, when Czechoslovakia was a democratic republic. Smile at my importunity, but once again the moon has pared itself thin, and I'm tired of talking to my hands. So, ancestor, leave the realm of roots, lick the ashes from your lips, and sit beside me for another talk. Your descendant needs you, Gustav, to lift this heaviness. Float along, feel a downward tug, pray for feathers, and they hand you a rock, right? My doctor, a wise man who also loves music, says, if you continue to feel this way about things you can't control, and you probably should, your blood pressure will continue to rise. Simple as that. We incinerate from within, or what's in the mirror bores us. It's wrong to think there's a choice, though. It's all those ancestral bohunks. You know the type. You were there. For 1,000 years, popes and monarchs dressed out their hopes like deer. Of course the spirit took on a heaviness, a gravity at the core. when all seemed upside down, as if they looked at the world hanging by the ankles from a plane tree. Benish and Masaryk cut them down. The lightness came at last. They danced a while in the clearing, then became a gift to the Russians. My grandfather stropped his straight edge at the kitchen sink under a calendar of scenes from Prague. "Tell me about Bohemia," I said. "Tell me where we came from." His fingers just below his ear pulled the skin of his cheek taut. The razor rasped, and in the mirror I saw the shine go out of his eyes. The heaviness descended in the warm room like fog. He told me nothing because he had to save himself from sadness. But he passed on the sadness anyway to my father and me, both of us moody men. Thanks for listening, Gustav. Now let us listen to something of yours. Maybe it will change the mood of this night, but I have my doubts. And then the last one is Mahler's last complete symphony was his ninth, and so this is the ninth poem, and that symphony is generally acknowledged to be a Mahler's sort of meditation on death. From time to time, as is the way with children, I was bad news to my father. Sweet as his own father, he tried to hide it, but even I could read his face. He thought of things I'd do and I didn't, and then by the time I'd done a thing or two, he'd died and gone off on his travels. Maestro, you didn't live to see it. Streptococcus saw to that. My grandfather didn't live to see it, and embolism saw to that. My father had another place to go after his heart abandoned him, but now, in early December 1989, I have lived to see the Czechs cry, "Svobodu, Svobodu," freedom, freedom. And maybe at long last they will have some, and that is good news, but all three of you missed it, and my father left even before he could be a grandfather. What lightness my daughter would have brought him. He has been a traveler for so long, he must by now be at the very fringes of the universe. In the final movement of your ninth, the melody keeps getting thinner and thinner, played by fewer and fewer instruments, slowed again, until it is held only by a few strings, almost silence itself. And then it just floats off like a quiet death. And that is how I imagine my father floating through space like a melody above the orchestra's body, between one bare wisp of light and another, searching as he did in life. But he must come here to earth for an end to bad news, and I don't think he can make it so far back. I'll read a poem each for my lady loves in the audience tonight. The first one for my daughter. Usually when I read from this sequence, I read the last three. I'll read an earlier one. This is from a sequence called A Dozen for Leah, for my daughter. And they're about her early childhood. This is the seventh one in the sequence. On our walks around the backyard, you don't want to take my hand. You want to find your own way. I try to grab your hand because I want less trouble for me, and you push it away because you want to touch everything. The loose layers of ash bark, the tongues of tiger lilies, the leathery tabs of the jade plant. If one comes off in your fingers, it's the price of your science. Soft grape leaves, the green scum at the bottom of the bird bath, even thorny branches of the bougainvillea. I hope you stay like this. I hope you always find your road only in the finding of it. Don't let anyone lead you, even if they tell you again and again you are lost. I may live to regret that wish for freedom, I don't know. Then a poem called Simple Truths, which has as its background a tribe of Peruvian Indians called the Caros, who live at 14,000 feet. I mean, they are so far above timberline, they can't even see the forest. Partly they live up there because they raise llamas and alpacas, and the alpacas especially do better at high altitude. They tend to get respiratory problems lower down. But because of where they live, they're just up in a bunch of scrabble, and because they live so high up, everything they use has to be brought from lower down, and their fields are down, way down, so everything is packed by llama. I also mention a literary character in here. I don't know how important it is to know who he is, but it's a guy named Nezhdanov, who is in a Turgenev novel called Virgin Soil. And Nezhdanov falls in love with a woman who is part of the peasant movement in Russia. And he gets involved then with all these people who are trying to free the peasants. And they're all trimming down their lifestyles and everything, but Nezhdanov is an aristocrat. And he tries for hundreds of pages to change. And he finally realizes he can't, and he commits suicide. And he leaves, I think there were 3 suicide notes to different people. And one of the notes is to the woman, and it begins, "Because I could not simplify myself." Simple truths. From 14,000 feet, the Caros looked down on the clouds and the rivers carved by a green snake the Creator dragged through the valleys. Wood, corn, potatoes must be trudged up steep switchbacks. The people are there because there the herds thrive. The thin air floats the soft notes of a wooden flute, and woven into them is the song sung to the herds. Because you drink, we drink. Because you eat, we eat. Because you are, we are. They also cling to the peaks because they know life gets less simple as it descends. In Cuzco, men like them are beasts of burden driven early into the ground by the loads they bear. Better sharp stones on a mountain trail than cobbles laid down by slaves. Better the burden of food for your children on your back than someone else's bale of rags. Simple truths, but Nezhdanov took his own life because he could not simplify himself. More and more, things don't bother me, since they are as temporary as I am. That's all I can tell you, Diane, when you come to me at night weighed down by a day that grew too long. Or I can take you outside and point to the stars and speak of our distance from them. Or I can point to one other simple truth. The light at noon hides the stars, but the stars are there. Just as when you feel you are alone, I am hidden, but there. Because you drink, I drink. Because you eat, I eat. Because you are, I am. When I was 19 and just getting serious about writing poetry, a poet I admired very much, I mean, I adored him, and he gave me a copy of Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet. If you don't know this book, it's some young poet sent Rilke some of his poems. And Rilke, rather than being of any critical help about the poems, started telling this young man everything he felt about the spirit and poetry and all this stuff. And the person who gave it to me was very well intentioned, and I'm sure he thought that this book would mildly inspire me in my path to becoming a poet. But it was probably not a very good book to give to a working class kid who was totally naive and incredibly impressionable. In the very first letter, Rilke says you have to go down and search your soul and decide whether you would die if you didn't write poetry. And I'm such a literalist, I thought, my God, maybe I'd better train to be a chef. And all through the book, there's this thing of going down inside yourself, and the self, and the self, and the two words that come up again are the self and solitude, and all of this stuff. And it took me many years to realize, and well, first, finally I found out that Rilke, to use Phil's phrase, did not know what work is. He spent his whole life living off the aristocracy, A guy would loan him Duino Castle, and Rilke would go live there and write the Duino elegies. And so he would say, hey, that's a pretty good deal. I think I'll loan him my castle. Maybe he'll write the elegies Casa de la Maison chez Hanzlicek or something. But I was under the spell of that foolish book for a long time, and then finally it dawned on me that it wasn't much fun to be inside, and that all of the things I loved in the world were outside me, not inside me, and that I had better to turn the eyes that way than that way. This is a little poem on that sort of subject called Inward. We look inward, and at first it is empty as a museum between exhibitions. Then we see a child staring at a blank wall, mute, who stopped asking when no one bothered to answer. In another room, an old man shuffles worn cards for solitaire, the only game in town. A woman weeps into her hands. A canary is dying of neglect. Memories gather in the corners like dust. This is why our houses have so many windows. This is a poem based on a poem by one of my favorite poets, a Hungarian named Attila József. And there are certain images of his, and the way the poem starts is very much like his, except he's talking about his mother and I'm talking about my wife. And it's again a poem about the self. And it's called C.G. Hanzlicek. Take my word for it, Hanzlicek, I love you. I can't help myself. I live with a woman who wakes to your needs and doesn't hate me for them. We can compare life to a worn shoe, a car out of gas on a back road, a lost ticket. Yet in the end, beyond the metaphors, we can't help loving life. It would be nice to buy a ticket to the self. It must be somewhere inside. We might arrive, though, too bored from the journey to want to see the sights. We might just lie on our back in the hotel room, counting brass spindles on the footrail of the bed, having our meals sent up, dreaming another self. There's a poem which I believe you have on your on the program, which also gravitates around this subject. One of the things I've been ashamed of about my generation is that the bestseller list all through my adulthood has been largely composed of self-help books. And it just seems so odd that, help yourself. Oh, okay. Again, I have an epigraph on this poem, and I have not quoted the full passage. The full passage from George Oppen is, these soul searchings, these prescriptions are a mere medical faddism, an attempt to lose oneself in the mystical self. The self is no mystery. The mystery is that there is something for us to stand on. And I just used those last two lines in mystery. There are no guardrails at Canyon de Chelly. On the very edge of the great brow of rock, I suffered a vertigo that tied me forever to the earth. I want to be here, with the oak floors creaking under me and outside among the flowers, where the columbine sensibly dies back upon itself in the first freeze. The mysteries are all here: roots, the leaves turning, the spiders hard at their geometry lessons, the seed that obeys perfectly its own limits, the worms turning among the leaves, turning the leaves to compost, dung beetle and bottlefly, the fluting of the white-crowned sparrow, the shrill cries of the flickers newly arrived, the dog at his dreams, the airiness of the dogwood, the heaviness of the cork oak, and the Bradford pear burning its deepest reds like a candle flame. And the sun, most mysterious, will be almost that red just before setting this evening. The muddiness of the self can be forgiven, almost forgotten, in the clarity of late October. I'm okay, you're not. Self-help book. I'm going to close with three recent poems, two from the summer and one lately. The first one is about the first student I had who was a veteran of the Vietnam War. And he's been very much in my mind all these years, but I just couldn't find a handle on how to write about this guy. The muse has a nasty habit of putting you on hold and playing Muzak, while you're trying to do something. In the middle of the poem, he speaks, and on the page it's clear because that part is in italics, but I think you'll see the shift in voice. And then it switches back to me at the end. In 1968, one of my students brought back from Vietnam a full black beard with a faint gray stripe descending from his lip. Skunk, they'd called him over there. A fungus that warped and yellowed his toenails, a tattoo of a bluebird perched on a vein in his forearm, the vein he'd used for horse, a duffel bag full of souvenirs he couldn't bear to open, and a very bad habit. When the alarm went off at 6 to wake him for my 8 o'clock class, whipped out of sleep, he'd slam his wife to the floor, flop on top of her, and drag the mattress over them. He didn't know what to do. He'd gone from an electric clock's buzzer to a quaint hand-wound bell alarm to a clock radio tuned to classical music, but it seemed any sound triggered the panic. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my wife. She's being very patient, won't hear of sleeping in another bed, but I've been scaring the crap out of her for 5 months now. My dreams aren't so bad. Mostly I dream the good times, and there were good times. I loved the jungle. It was right out of my childhood movies. Thousands of shafts of light, acetylene white, like legs holding up the canopy. The birds bulleting by at eye level, smoking weed in that wildness and listening to tapes of music from home. And the nights when the noises suddenly fell off in a single second and a rush of adrenaline ran through me. And of course there were the men. You get close when all of you decide, because you have to decide, that killing a man means nothing. You take whatever you thought was right and shove it up a monkey's ass and shoot without aim, and that's all there is to it. And it's all right, even in dreams. It's waking up that's the nightmare. For me, the war was a series of legal evasions, student deferments and then teaching deferments. And it only seemed like my president's war, with his nightly homespun lies on the news and his odd stabs at humanizing himself by showing off his pet beagles, him and her, the three of them looking like they'd been run through a genetic blender to be poured out identical triplets. But then this solitary man handed me the war for my own, just when there was also a run of rumors about an end to all deferments. And my wife and I began to burn and toss in sleep and waking dreams over what might become of us. But it wasn't the same. We could make plans, 2 years in prison or crossing into Canada, but he had no plan. I write this on the 5th of July, 1991. A piece of fireworks called the Screamer went off last night in the middle of one of my dreams and made me think again of him. I don't know if he lost his wife. I don't know if the bluebird lost its perch. I don't know if he ever found a way to make some kind of life. The semester ended, simply ended, and he drifted off with the others without my getting his phone number, which, you understand, was unlisted. And then a poem set over on the Central Coast. There was a bird over there, and I was looking through the bird book, and I couldn't find out what it was, and then suddenly it came up off the end of the pier and went, "Skua!" So then I knew it was a skua. Sometimes nature is very helpful. And it starts with another kind of bird called a shearwater. Sometimes it's very plentiful. The poem is called Feeding Frenzies. The last time it was shearwaters. They appeared out of the fog bank like a second fog bank, only darker. It took 5 minutes of their move toward shore before we could tell there were birds. Before we could tell they were birds, thousands of them wildly circling inches off the water. In 5 more minutes, we could see that they were riding herd on a school of fish, driving them to the beach. And then suddenly they were there, right in front of us, and the anchovies were boiling and popping out of the water, even onto the sand, and the shearwaters were moaning and crooning and squealing in the madness of appetite that surely, this time, would be slaked. They gorged until the fish stir stopped, and then were gone, back to the open sea. This morning, the red snappers were running right off the end of the pier, and there were cormorants who could relax and make shallow dives, half a dozen harbor seals rolling under and then bobbing up again, looking almost bemused at the easy life, and what looked to be nearly 100 dive-bombing brown pelicans. Each time a pelican dove, a little band of skuas hit the water beside it, screaming, trying to rob its pouch. All morning, this dark cloud of birds rose and fell over the water like a swarm of midges, and watching it was as good as breakfast. For over 20 years we've come here when the valley heat became too much, and little has changed. I'd like to point you to this place, I really would, but you'd come here, which would be all right, until you'd slip and tell some idiot cousin with an interest in real estate. And your cousin would find Flo, poor, weary Flo, at last sick of her sausage and egg breakfast place, and she'd sell in a minute, and it wouldn't be breakfast anymore. The cousin would open the place for 3 meals a day, backhoe the succulent garden next door to put in a barbecue pit, tear out the walls of the upstairs apartment for an oyster bar, and it would be a whole new world. There was a moment around noon when those feeding birds suddenly, mysteriously took a break and came to rest on the water. And then some broken link in the human chain drove his boat right through the flock. It took 15 minutes for the birds to gather their thoughts, and even then, everything they did looked ragged, almost random. Because we were human, we mourned. We mourned the man in the boat who could never be our brother, not even a distant cousin. And we mourned Flo, who someday may hold her head over her mistake. And we mourned the pelican, who must always have one eye open for the skua thief. And we mourned the skua, who has become the model for realtors. And we mourned you, whose cousin barred you from this place. Because if we told you where it is, we'd have nowhere, literally nowhere, to feed. I'll end with an elegy for a friend of many of us. I wish this poem had come to me before we had the memorial reading. for Ernesto, but the muse had me on hold again. It's in two parts, and I'll just pause briefly between them. We never really thought of it as spring until the swallows, first the scouts, days later the rest of the flock, came to rebuild last year's nests on the side ledge of the bridge. Then all through the summer, mornings and evenings, hundreds of them soared and twittered over the house, flashing midnight blue. There's a new bridge now, but without a ledge to hold a nest, and only a bewildered few out of some blind force come to build beneath the bridge. The first release of irrigation water dissolves their mud bottle nests. They circle in a frenzy for a few days and then are gone for another year. The simplest plan would have saved them, would have kept the season whole, less sad. What is that sadness brought on by mere human stupidity next to the sadness that spring came to Ernesto as a time for devotion to his dying? In autumn, they mapped his face in blue ink zones for radiation. At the turn of the year, chemotherapy had him shopping for caps. By Easter, he looked older than his father. On May 11, he left before dawn. O God, in whom I do not believe, this was a man who lived for the light, who hated nothing and no one, who took to the air as sweetly as a swallow. At the bridge that crosses from here to there, I hope you had some plan for him. I hope he is less bewildered now than we who can only look to the sky and blindly wish for his return. Thank you.